So, hello and welcome back to the chat show on calming anxiety. I know for the past few years it's just been daily meditations, but now we're reintroducing people with real stories of positivity, of rebirth, regrowth, and overcoming adversity. And what could be more perfect, really, than having Debbie on now, who has a phoenix. I mean, it is poetic license. It's beautiful. So this is Debi Richens. Debbie, I'd like you to just do a little brief intro for yourself to the listeners and viewers. And then we'll get into just chatting about what you do and why I'm so happy that you're here. So Debbie, welcome and introduce yourself.
Martin, thank you. It's an absolute delight to be here. And, when you first asked me, I just thought, oh, this is so exciting. So I'm really pleased to be here. So I'm Debi Richens, and actually, I am just morphing into the relationship phoenix. Going from soul, because soul was what a couple of my clients had called me a couple of years ago as I was starting to migrate really fully into my branding. But relationship fits even better, because relationship is about relationship with self and relationship with others. And that's what my work is about. My work is about particularly working people within the family unit that isn't working so well for whatever reason. The major reasons are family alienation and family estrangement. And they are very impactful on how we see ourselves and how others see us and how we relate to everybody around us. And having experienced that for 18 years, and on that journey of growth and learning who I was, actually understanding I've experienced a lot of it since childhood, I then saw how much I'd changed. And I know I can help others do the same. And I do help others do the same.
And that's it, isn't it? This is the overriding feeling I get when talking to anyone within our sort of sphere of helping others, empowerment. We've been there, as opposed to going to your GP or something like that, where they're just trying to help you feel better. They don't get it. And
exactly. They don't get it.
They
and they
don't, do
rather
they?
mask it with medication
Yeah.
and send you to free courses, which
Mhm.
actually keep you stuck in that place of trauma.
Yeah.
And when I was able to extricate myself from that, that's when my real growth started.
That's brilliant. So you do relationships, and when we first connected, the thing that I liked was that you mentioned about being alienated, or you lost that connection with family members, which I had never sort of dealt with or understood. I understand grief, or personally I don't have that chip. I'm not wired that way, which helped as a paramedic. But I always remember one thing that really stuck out, so we'll get into this, is when my marriage of 20 years broke up, which was over 10 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
I turned around to my wife and said it was like she had died, that I wouldn't have that connection anymore. Um, so tell me from your perspective how it affected you, and then how you now help others.
But to begin with, before I had done any work at all, I was in a place of deep grief, but I didn't understand I was in a place of deep grief because I was being told by the professionals that I was deeply depressed. But actually, my functioning didn't show I was depressed.
Right.
What was going on for me was that I was trying to make sense of what was going on around me. So there was a very high level of anxiety because I didn't know at that time that my body was also rebelling very big time and was brewing something very nasty for me for just a short while down the road. But that had already been brewing and had been seen but nobody understood what it was, because when they went to do the archetypal, stick the cameras everywhere and go and explore, they didn't find it because they weren't looking in the right place. So I'm referring actually to the singular gallstone that nearly killed me at the beginning of 2007. And that singular gallstone was a ball of calcium. And that, at the speed it developed, is extreme stress and distress, which is what I had been experiencing in the relationship, in the marriage, over many, many years. But it had started in a very short space of time and had actually been seen by an optician who sent me in 2004, sent me to the hospital to go and get it investigated, and they looked up and down and decided that there was nothing going on. But of course, this was just brewing very slowly in the gallbladder. And then as I went through the walking away from the family unit, which wasn't by choice, that's when it accelerated and suddenly took over and literally was killing me from the inside out. So my emotional distress was actually the physical symptoms pushing my body to try and make me stop, but I was in survival mode. And so that survival mode meant I had to go to work. I had to put a roof over my head. I had to pay my bills. I had to keep my car on the road. And I had to try a way of keeping a relationship with my daughter, which was becoming increasingly difficult because of the other adults that had stepped into her life and decided to take over my position as mother. And so I was in that place of deep grief and didn't know it. And when I truly understood a few years later, I met the most lovely lady at business networking. And she was talking about a program that she sold called the Grief Recovery Program, and that she was a grief recovery specialist. And she said one phrase that really stuck out for me. Grief is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations of the future. So when our trajectory changes through whatever the purpose is, we are in grief. For me, my daughter was 14. So I lost that connection of her last years at school. I lost seeing her do her exams and celebrating that with her. I lost seeing her go on to her future education. And I lost that connection with her becoming a hairdresser, and a very good one at that. So I couldn't celebrate any of those things with her. I also lost the hopes, dreams, and expectations of a settled and happy marriage, because it hadn't been for a very long time for various reasons. So there was the retiring together. There was the doing other things together. There was having a life after the daughter had left home. All of those things, I hadn't realized I was grieving those. Then there was the loss of my home that I was working towards and paying towards as well. There was the loss of the animals that were in our lives, and they were part of our family. So again, I was grieving that loss, and I sort of just put it down to, that's life. And I couldn't take them with me. I had nowhere to take them. When you do 3 weeks of sofa surfing before you find somewhere to live, it's you can't take animals just willy-nilly. So all of those things were gone. But then there was a wider aspect to it. The loss of community around me, the loss of community I lived in, the loss of the everyday friends that I hadn't realized I would miss so much. And then because I had to move, financially, I had to make the decision to move because I needed to survive. I was nowhere near thriving. So in my head, it was, I have to pay my bills. I have to keep a roof over my head. I have to have a sensible job. So I went back into the world of dentistry, which I loved, but also I didn't. I didn't love the politics of it. And when you go into the world of private dentistry, you have the very switched on dentists, or you have the ones that are making money.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I had a few that were making money. And that went against the moral values that I then had, that I had been taught when I first went into dentistry.
Right.
So I was able to do the job standing on my head, and that was good. I didn't have to make any effort for that. But then when I went into the world of working for myself, that's when I started to really step up and change for myself.
Okay.
And it was enlightening, but it was that phrase, grief is the loss of hopes, dreams, and expectations.
I think that's, I mean,
It was a
having
clinch.
gone through it myself, I see that now. But for those listening in, I just say from my perspective, and I'm not denigrating anything from my previous relationship. In fact, as a caveat, I always say one of my best friends now is my ex-wife. In fact, it's rather poignant. This time last year, she stepped up to the mark and saved me. But it is that loss. However, we're so totally unaware of what can be. Now, for me, myself, I have never been in a more positive, happier, relaxed place in my entire world. Marriage is brilliant, and it suited me back then, but it doesn't define me. And I think we just become happy in that. And as humans, we are worried about what we don't know. So, for me aside, I've never been more focused, grounded, happy. However, for you lost all of your hopes and dreams. How have you overcome that? And what salient points would you pass on? I mean, I know you teach it because this is your life, you're as a therapist, but as a general rule, how did you help yourself recover to where you are now?
Well, to begin with, I was gaslighted by all of the various authorities that we have in our lives when we're going through a divorce, because nobody really saw me and nobody really heard me. It was that, and that very much relates to how people speak to us when we're grieving. It'll all be all right, time's a great healer. All of these phrases that actually are incredibly insulting. And people don't mean to insult you, but, they've grown up with all those phrases and they use them. And another one that really irks me is when everybody, overstates the Kubler-Ross, steps of grieving. Because actually that was a misquote by the New York Times back in the early 1970s. And they made it into something that would give them a readership article. And it's that myth has perpetuated permanently ever since. We all grieve differently. And so there is no rule about how we grieve. And actually, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's article was about the regrets of dying people in their last 3 months of life. It wasn't about the people that were left behind and how they dealt with their grief. So people are taught that grief is uniform, and it really isn't. It is not a linear thing where you start at step 1 and go to step 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. It is actually, I don't know if you've seen that wonderful meme. It's not a straight line. It's a little bit, somebody's got a ball of wool and they've gone, and it's all over the place. This ball of wool, all over the place. There's a beginning and an end, and then there's this blob in the middle. And that's what grief is. We go up, we go down, we go roundabout. We don't go in a straight line. And that for me was one of the biggest things, because I knew I wasn't depressed. I knew I wasn't depressed, but everybody kept telling me I was depressed. I knew actually that I had levels of anxiety, but it wasn't what they were trying to pigeonhole me with. This anxiety will make you feel suicidal. Well, I've never felt suicidal in my life. I know people do. And I know that that is incredibly debilitating. And I've been so fortunate not to be. I have had thoughts of how would the world look if I wasn't here? That's very different to suicidation.
Yeah.
So, when I would make those comments, people would immediately jump on this, oh, you're going to do suicide bandwagon. Never. It's never occurred to me. And I couldn't ever get my head around why people would want to put me into that place. And I found that really worrying that people were speaking like that to me without really hearing me. And then as I started to be more curious, I stepped into all of the things we do, so we go down a spiritual path and we do this path and we do that path. And, a little bit of money spent here, a little bit of money spent there. And it's a little bit like a sticking plaster. It's a feel-good factor for the time you're in it.
Yeah.
And it's all right trying to keep doing that process. But actually, if the process isn't serving you, you soon let go of it, which I did for most of those things. And a turning point was actually the combination of tapping and grief recovery. Because tapping gave me the moment to shut the world out and just focus on me. And then as I stepped into grief recovery, that changed everything again, because I just had so many realizations of the baggage I'd been carrying from my childhood, from the experiences I'd had growing up, and how they were coloring my life. What it also showed me was the reason why I had been so distressed when I had been made homeless. And that was because I grew up with no foundation as a child. I had literally moved and moved and moved and moved and moved. And I didn't actually stay in one home until I was 7 years old. And then I was in that home until I was 15. And that was the longest place I'd ever lived anywhere in my life.
You weren't a forces child by any chance, were you?
No, I wasn't a forces child. Actually, my mother left my father when my youngest brother was 9 days old. Oh. I was 4.5. So. My mother left on the 1st of March 1969, and Erin Pizzi opened Chiswick Women's Refuge in November 1969.
Well, from a therapist point of view, it's like, wow, that's a lot of unpacking there.
Yeah.
That's
massive unpacking, but it was, and I've always had this thirst for knowledge. We were surrounded by books as children. We didn't have a television, so it was books and conversation when I was a child. And I was fascinated by the human body, and I hadn't even learned about how the brain and the body work together at that point. Right. But as I was on growing into an adult, that started to really pique my interest. Mm-hmm. And I would read everything I could about how the brain works, how the mind works. And so I slipped into neuroscience before it became a brand. But it was how I started to understand myself, that curiosity, and really understanding the levels of grief. It made me want to explore it more. And then I walked into NLP, and it changed my world absolutely, entirely. And the combination of NLP and hypnosis has been just my step up, and I love it. I love it with a passion.
I mean, for me, when I had my therapy about 8 years ago, I worked for the ambulance service, and and everything came to a head. And it wasn't, everyone automatically assumes, oh, well, you see so many bad things. That's never bothered me. I'm not wired like that. I was born to be a paramedic, because I could go into all of what people deem to be the tricky jobs, and I'm just focused, competitive. But I went into this therapy. It's called Rewind. It's developed for the military for PTSD.
Yes.
It was the most transformative moment of my life. If they had called it hypnotherapy, I wouldn't have engaged. I'd been to counselling, which just, I never wish to speak negative, so I won't talk about it, but it doesn't work for me. Or that therapist didn't work for me. But this Rewind absolutely just light bulb moment, and also switching off the negative within my own
Mm,
internal dialogue. And that opened my mind to what I do now. Hence, I now do this. And it is amazing when you find, for you, NLP hypnosis, for me, it was hypnotherapy. It's basically coping to mastery.
mm,
Amazing. And I put it in every session I do, no matter
yeah,
what someone comes to me for.
yeah,
So, so you had that moment. It changed you.
mm.
Um, what were your main takes from it in positives that changed you and how you saw yourself and your grief?
Well, interestingly, where I started with grief, I didn't really know where I was going, except that I knew I wanted to do something within the world of alienation because I'd had some real extremes in those early years. I'd never met anybody else that had those extremes. And I have to say, I'm really quite pleased. But what I see is a lot of people stuck in a well of grief that they just don't know how to lift themselves out of.
Yeah.
And the debilitation, they deserve to live a happy and healthy life. They don't deserve to live in that place of pain and distress and, literally sort of having a boundary that they can't seem to escape.
Yeah.
And so I really wanted to do something within that world. I'd already started a grandparents support group by the time I did that training, and I could see the value in being able to show them a different way of being. And for whatever reason, life got in the way, and dying mum-in-law who I'd been looking after, and then COVID, and then she died, and then my mother, bless her, filled the spots. So it was an interesting couple of years. And I sort of limped along, but I knew I wanted more and I didn't know what it was. And then I stepped into the NLP work because the conversations I was seeing around it, the language, everything fitted where I was going.
Right.
And I was curious again, that curiosity got the better of me, and I wanted to know, how it would make a difference to me. And in month 5, my brother suddenly died. The brother who I was estranged from because of the death of our father back in 2013. So, that was 9 years we were estranged. And again, I was able to look at that because that estrangement was about grief and unexpressed childhood grief and anger and guilt and fear and shame and all the things we experienced because of the parental relationship that we had not had with our father.
Yeah.
And that all came to a head for my brother, and he didn't know how to express it except to take it out on me. And I couldn't change how he felt about it. All I could do was get on with life. So when he died, I could have just gone off the edge. The people I was training with picked me up and held me.
Oh.
And that was with the power of NLP, because they were able to show me that I didn't have to fall off the precipice. And that was very powerful. And I had absolutely no idea how I was going to advance into masters, but I did. And I came away from masters with such invigorated energy and belief in myself in a way I just hadn't had it before. And that's so powerful, and I'd already had some amazing testimonials from clients by that time. So I knew I could do it.
Yeah.
And this step into where I am now, and now going into being able to train NLP and being able to train hypnotherapy, is really about how I make a bigger impact within the world of alienation. And that is, there are very few coaching people within this world. The great majority of them have experienced it, so they all come to it from their own unique perspective of the pain they've experienced.
Yeah.
I want to take that a step further, and I want to create a coaching practice of coaches of different ages and, different colors, different creeds, who've all experienced alienation at different levels, so that they can not only do the work with me and get off that horrible, horrible, circle of pain, but step into being able to empower themselves by helping others.
Well,
because I can't do this all on my own.
No, you can't. But there's no
And
great
I
gift
need others to do that.
Yeah.
So if we all come at it from a healthy, whole place together, where we're always coming back together, so we can do CPD together, continuing professional development. They can learn from my grief experience and how I can teach them that as well. And they can then take their step in the world and make their mark. Because, for me, it's not about me. It's about what I create for the day when my grandchildren come back to my home, back to my door. Because one day I have this belief they will come back. But I don't want to be that person I was before.
No.
I want to be that healthy, thriving, productive person who is doing something that is not only keeping me in a really healthy place, but is also sharing that healthy energy with others.
And there's no greater legacy than that. I mean, obviously, I wish you in the future that this happens. All right. I have no concept of putting myself in that position. I don't think I've ever had that sort of loss, apart from the grief of my marriage. But then now, as I've said, ex-wife is one of my best friends. And from a male point of view, I worked on that so that my sons could see this is how adults do it. However, that was 50% of my ex-wife's view.
Yes.
That we were just two adults that just drifted apart. And I think our legacy between me and my ex is that my sons will go, well, that's how grown-ups do it. But they can be proud that myself and my ex are their parents. But that's by the by. So you do this now.
That's what I'd like to foster in the healing of those in that alienated world, that they can pick themselves out of victim and they can be empowered to be able to create those relationships.
But that's it. Too many people, from my perspective only, and I know this one's contentious, they wallow in that victimhood. And I've seen that, having been a paramedic for over 20 years, with all of the mental health patients that I saw, of which I loved working with them, because I identified, I've made no secret that I was in a psych unit as a teenager. And I have an eclectic personality trait, with zero filter. Which is why I do my daily meditations. They help me. I described it to someone recently. Meditation for me, mindfulness and self-hypnosis, it's like being those carbon rods in a nuclear reactor.
Yes.
So when your brain's starting to fire off and cascade and have that chain reaction of being as I would say it, the slightly less socially responsible idiot I used to be, meditation just puts those rods in and calms it down. But again, I digress. I'm going on about me. And I want to dig deep into when you get someone coming to you who've been alienated from their family, what's your course of action? How do you help them overcome that? Because you can't help the broader picture. We can't force people to come back into their fold. How do you structure their lives to, I suppose, in essence, accept where they are now, and that possible future is not theirs anymore? How do you take it from there?
The first thing is about acknowledging the experiences they've had. not just the present experiences that they're experiencing in this moment that have brought them to me, but actually all of the experiences they've had. Because without understanding where they come from, you can't see how and why they're behaving now. But it also allows them to have a broader perspective, much like I did when I did my first grief work. And I looked at that timeline and thought, oh my goodness, I can see it now. Now I understand why I kept going back to that place unconsciously and not knowing why. I didn't know what the baggage was from my childhood until I started to dig deeper. Yeah. So the beauty, obviously, of hypnosis and with timeline work is that we don't actually have to know what the stuff is, but it helps me to be able to plan a more personal program for my client. And every single client is a unique person, so there is no one size fits all, because I have to see how it works for that person and what they're amenable to, because some people are in such a place of fear that actually letting go of that to be able to allow themselves to then relax and let those things go is a priority. So first of all, it's acknowledging the experiences, because of course the other thing we're taught with all of those wonderful phrases is, oh, it'll all be all right when so-and-so happens, and it changes. When they have, I was told by my GP, or when your daughter has children, it'll all change. Oh, famous last words. That's when it got worse. And I was just stuck in this place of being gaslighted by the GP. It wasn't intentional, but she was literally spouting off the same phrase that hundreds of thousands of people just spout off, because that's what we were modeled as we were growing up. So we reiterate the stuff that actually isn't healthy. So that's the first thing I teach them, actually, is that there is a lot of language out there that actually we need to be really mindful of, and we need to detach ourselves from, because it does us more harm than good. So once they've got those two things out the way, then they can start looking at where they want to be, what they really want from their lives. What's the goal outside of this? Where are you heading? What do you want to do? Do you want to be happy in a new relationship? Do you want to spend several years just on your own first, really getting to know you? Yeah. Do you want to change your work, your income? Do you want to travel? What is it that you put away when you chose to get married that actually you really want to do now?
Oh, I like that.
Because it's about giving them a step into a life to work towards. It's the journey I've done, and I still haven't achieved all those things. They'll come as life goes on. I've got stacks of time. So, I'm not beating myself up about it. But a lot of people do. I haven't done so and so, and they go into their head and they tell themselves off and they criticize themselves and they judge themselves, because it's easier to do that than it is to deal with it.
I think we are naturally hardwired as a species at a real base stem level to always see the worst that could possibly happen. I think it's a real defense mechanism. Yes. However, as I tell friends and clients, there are no saber-toothed tigers or lions running around. Well, certainly not England.
Exactly that. And it's that, as you say, fight or flight and the fawning. But it's when people start to understand the differences between fight, flight, and fawning, and where fawning is putting themselves in the problem, and once they start to realize those things, then they can start to extricate themselves from those things. And that's what the beauty of timeline work is, and parts work, where we can really look at the individual bits that are really sticking plasters that need to be ripped off to let everything out. But it's also where they get their learnings. And it's the same with hypnotherapy. You know that the process is all about, it's not about wiping out what's going on in the mind. It's about allowing the mind to calm down in a sufficient manner that the mind can make sense of the rubbish it's been carrying around and say, that's it, I've had enough now. It's gone.
Yeah.
you
That
know,
is it in
and
a nutshell.
and the fact that we can take learnings from it is the most powerful thing.
Yeah.
Because if we suddenly realize that actually we've been carrying around something that's generational and it was never ours to begin with, it's so much easier to let go of it.
Yeah.
And,
Well,
that's really powerful change.
so you work with your client, you you help them enable themselves to see their new life, which isn't the one they wanted. All right. So this is going to be an interesting way that I see it. They empower themselves, they accept their new life, they go and build this new life, which is happy and positive, and then whatever they lost then wants to come back in and destabilize it. Do you have a way? 'Cause I don't
Yeah.
ever think of negatives, but that would appear one. How do they deal with that?
Well, to begin with, it's there's a lovely phrase somebody said to me recently, which really made me smile. You've become a bit Teflon coated.
Hmm. That,
So there's another phrase that I really like that actually explains it better, and it's anti-fragility, because anti-fragility is a step up from resilience. We can all create resilience, and resilience is lovely. It's a fantastic part of life, but it's very easy to slip off the cliff and go backwards.
yeah,
With anti-fragility, we're a little bit more bulletproof, and we're able to step back and assess from a different perspective. So, as I'm taking my clients through the work, I want them to step back and take a look from a different perspective. Okay, so this person is coming back. What is the agenda that you are experiencing in listening to their words? What's going on? Because actually, 9 times out of 10, they're not coming back to cause harm. They're coming back because they have a need. And the only person that's ever been able to assuage that need is whoever you are. But of course, you've changed. So you can look with a more balanced perspective. And if you feel yourself sliding back into their stuff, you can take a breath and step out of it. And that's really, really important, because I can quite categorically tell you when I was going through this and up to the point of doing the first lot of grief work I did, I could not have explained any of those things without being in the worst flood of tears. It was a big waterfall.
yeah,
Now I can have balanced conversations and I can talk about the darkest parts of my experiences, but there's no tears. And that's not because I don't feel the emotion, but it's because I've got rid of all the crap that was attached to it.
You verbalized
So I
that
can look
so
at it with
well.
a perspective.
Because that's where I am now. I love the anti-fragility bit. And I realized that this weekend. So as a caveat on timescale, so it's a Monday today. On Saturday at the weekend, I received a letter from a debt collecting agency for £4,000, £4,000, for something that I don't owe. So as part of I'm under an NDA here. Hang on a minute. As part of leaving something hypothetically, the other
Yes.
party had agreed to cover this cost, and they haven't. And over the weekend, I kept sort of smiling to myself, thinking, I'm not stressed at all. Most people would be, even though I personally don't owe it, it'd still be stressful. And I phoned the debt collecting agency up today, and I emailed the other hypothetical party.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sent this whole email chain to the debt collecting agency. And the woman was so lovely. And it's like, you're very calm. And I'm going, it's not I'm not going to get stressed over something that A, is out of my control, or B, actually isn't my fault anymore. And I realized how much I had changed. And anti-fragility, that sums it up perfectly. Because I'm not coming now from a place of strength or confidence, whereas before I would have had a real as we say, abreaction to that.
Yeah.
Um, and equally so, I mean, it all comes in one go. Last month, I had bailiffs arrive at my door. And I opened the door and I said, hello. And they were saying, we're bailiffs. They explained where from. And I realized, oh, I know what this is about. Come in, guys. And they
Mm.
couldn't have been more shocked at my approach. Um, and it was over an unpaid debt by a previous partner. Um, Sadly, it's in my name. So I paid, but I'm just like, let's just sort this out.
Mm.
Why allow myself, my harmony, my peace to have big negative reactions? And I understand the old me would have been, well, fuming and would have been consumed still. Whereas now I'm like, whatever. And I think if any of my clients or most of us who are therapists, and this is another one, and again, I will ramble. I've never met an unhappy hypnotherapist because we become so aware of the words we use when we meet new clients, when we talk to patients. Everything is a positive. As my hypnotherapy trainer, Chris Fleet from the Devon School of Hypnotherapy, shout out to him, changed my world. He said there are no no's and don'ts. And that rubs off in the way we talk to ourselves.
Yes.
And we become empowered. So again, I've digressed. I should have written a note on where we were just then. But it was about what if a family member comes in, because I've actually had that. I had from the age of 10, my older brother was 2.5 years older than me. We
Mm-hmm.
didn't like each other. We may have been family, but we were not friends.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like a lot about him, really. Borderline chain smoker. I think 40 to 50 a day, functioning alcoholic, not nice towards the rest of the family. But I've never let that negatively impact me. And he, sadly for him and his family, he passed away a few years ago from a brain tumor. And I now, as a hypnotherapist, have consciously decided to find the positive memories so I could think of him happily. But
Yes.
had he been alive and walked back into my life, it wouldn't have impacted me negatively now either. Because
And this is the thing, it's this level that we take, because part of when we're working with clients is often the ahas we have. Oh, I've actually got a little bit of that going on as well.
yeah,
So then we go away and we do the work on that. So
yeah,
we are a constant evolving animal, if you like.
yeah.
And, hypnotherapy is such a powerful tool for that.
It's
Such a powerful tool
well,
for that.
of course, I would say that. I mean, it transformed me.
Mm-hmm.
Although I had it many years, about 30 years. Oh my God, that date. I was just thinking. Yeah, so over 30 years ago, I went to see a hypnotherapist because I used to suck my thumb at night. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I was very open about this, and people go, oh, that's so childish. Well, let's just stop there a minute. I'm asleep. Okay, it's like telling someone off for snoring. All right. But hypnotherapy didn't work. And then I turned 30 and I just said to myself that the most amazing word in the world, enough. And I never sucked it again. I had made that subconscious choice. But, I was going to go down the other rabbit hole. The word enough was one of my podcasts. I am still hoping to get this girl on one day who changed her life one day. She had been a patient, a regular patient as a paramedic. She was a heroin addict, an alcoholic. And then I bumped into her many years later, recognized her whilst I was on a different sort of job, and she was a carer. And I said, oh, I know you. And we connected, and she said who she was. I was gobsmacked and said, how did you do that? And she just said, I woke up one morning and said, enough. Wow. Just wow. she changed her life around. And I
And
think,
actually, that's so interesting because that wasn't far off where I'd been when I did the grief work.
yeah,
That was it. Enough now.
yeah,
I've got tools now that are practical and will allow me to move forward.
yeah. And if you can teach your customer base, your clients, those small tools, and they are just so powerful.
Mhm.
I don't believe there's a miracle cure, and I do turn around to my patients and say, look, you're going to sit down in my chair. I'm not going to go like that, sleep, and then eyes open and you're cured. You
Yeah.
actually have to do some work.
Yes.
Um, but then they listen to the Calming Anxiety podcast on a daily basis, and bingo,
Wonderful.
everything's wonderful.
But it is about that, isn't it? It's about engagement and involvement.
Yeah,
And as long as you've got engagement, involvement, and doing that opportunity work, the tasks that we set in between, as long as you have those three things, your client is going to thrive.
yeah, they are. But do you ever have any clients? I doubt so much within your niche that come to you but don't really engage or want to change.
Oh, I have had a couple of clients like that because their fear is too great.
Right.
And, there are too many dissenting voices around them that are preaching the same old, same old.
Yeah.
And they're stuck in that place that they're not sitting, it's like Pavlov's dog, isn't it? Sitting on the nail.
Mm-hmm.
They're not quite sitting on a sharp enough nail.
Yeah. After this podcast, and after the recording, I'll tell you about a recent one who I think their whole psychological issue defines their life. And they're the ones that you think, well, I know you want to change, but deep down you don't. And even the part that's withholding them from changing, it's not that. Their whole life is structured around, this is me, I have this problem.
Yes.
They're the people I like to work with. Gives me the greatest satisfaction. But then I come from a place of being very competitive. I don't like to be beaten. So I remember when I was in training, one of my closest friend used to work in intelligence and had been trained to resist interrogation. So he was very niche and very specialist within the services. Again, being careful on that one. And he's that top 1% that can't be hypnotized. Now, I don't believe people cannot be hypnotized. Stage hypnosis, not a problem.
Yes.
But everyone can be, because we're all affected by the world around us. So the first session I ever did with him, I told him, I won't be hypnotizing you, but it was mainly a handshake from me to his subconscious to trust me as his friend. Second session, hook, line and sinker. I could have made him cluck like a chicken, just like. But I did get rid of the pain in his shin. He had been shot through the leg on active service once, and he's got residual pain, but not anymore, mate. So there you go. Well, Debi, thank you. Before we go, is there anything else you'd like to say? Obviously, I'll put all your links within the show notes so people can reach out. So if they're experiencing this loss, this alienation, rejection from a family or a group, they can get in touch with you. Do you do sessions via Zoom so you can help?
I do most of my work via Zoom because it enables me to, touch people in parts of the world where they may not have someone closer at hand.
Yeah.
And that's often the way, like everything, we're all in groups. And I tend to be in this place here where I am based in the UK. But, I've worked with people in Australia, I've worked with people in America and, Canada. So it can happen.
I think
what I would offer and what I always offer is a free consultation chat.
Okay.
And, I like people to do that on Zoom because then they can see me, they can get to know me, get a feel for me. So it's completely free because I want them to know that they're in a safe place. Although you can do that on the telephone, Some people need to see,
Yeah.
and they need to get a feel for you, and they can't always do that on the telephone.
No, they can't.
You know, everybody needs to hear, but sometimes we need more than one sense to be really comfortable with a person. So it's important to me that I can give them that space
Good.
where they can make their own mind up, you know, and if they say at the end of it, well, actually, there's something I'm not quite sure of, then they're free to move away and go elsewhere.
Yep.
But, you know, I've never had that yet. So it's...
well, that's it, isn't it? I mean, it is nice. I think we are so fortunate. We live in a time as therapists. I live in rural North Devon in the southwest of England, but I see clients predominantly in the States, but globally. And I feel blessed for that. But I will put your link for booking you for this consultation call. So anyone listening, it's already in the show notes. There's me future pacing, thinking ahead, but when this comes out, it does my head in. Anything else? Any other bits coming up that you'd like to mention? Put you on the spot.
It's about self-compassion. Okay. It's about loving yourself, and it's again, it's something that our generation, and I'm 60 this year, so I'm talking our generation, you know.
60, right? Okay. What month?
July.
Okay. So you young thing, first of all, and you don't look it. Okay. Absolutely. I'm gobsmacked. You cannot be 60 in July. All right. Yeah. Okay. But I say young pup because I turned 60 in May. So I beat you.
Well, you're not that old. So there you are. Because I don't think you're 60 years old, but I think of it in generational terms and the language that we grew up with. Yeah. And part of that language was about putting ourselves last and putting everybody else in front of us. So we didn't learn how to love ourselves in a compassionate and considered way. No. And as I learned that, which also came from understanding the grief aspects that I had carried around like a pile of boulders for all of my life, and the impact they'd had on every decision I'd made, every tough place I stayed in when I should have cut my losses and gone a lot sooner. When I learned how to be compassionate to myself and loving towards myself in an emotional way, that's when I really started to thrive. Yeah. That's when things started to change. So it's the biggest advice I can give everybody is don't be so damned hard on yourself. We're not perfect. Yeah. We weren't built to be perfect.
No.
Treat yourself with love and compassion. Self-care goes a long way.
Yeah. I totally get that. That is exactly how I've been. The day I turned off that negative internal dialogue, which was there every second of every day, saying that I was a failure, and we all know that comes from childhood, I learned to love myself, and we cannot help others if we don't love ourselves first. And that goes for friends, family, everything. You know, to those mums that are struggling to put their family first, you've got to heal yourself. You cannot heal from a place of broken heart and fractured or self-loathing.
No. Well, there's that old phrase, isn't there? And it is one that does ring true. You cannot pour from an empty jug.
No. So thank you so much. I've loved it. I hope my audience does, and I hope those that are in need of your skills, your abilities, will reach out and contact you. So thank you very much. Bye, everyone.